and welcome. Welcome to all board members, to members of the public and to members of the press who are accessing the meeting virtually today. Just want to remind you that the meeting is being recorded for future upload to our web. I'd also like to remind board members and participants to use the show of hands facility to speak at the meeting rather than the chat function. Can I ask for apologies, Ruth?
Thank you, Boyd. I have one apology for today's meeting, and that is from Louise Bussell, and I believe that Pam Kremen is going to be substituting for her.
Yes, and Louise is missing from the meeting today because she's involved in the Lewis Ritchie meetings here in Skye. Declarations of conflicts of interest. Any declarations? Alistair?
Yes, thank you, Boyd, and good morning, everyone. I had considered making a declaration of interest in my capacity as a Highland councillor, but having applied the objective test and looking at the agenda that's before us today and my connection to those items, I feel I don't need to do so. Thank you.
Thanks, Alistair. Any further declarations of interest? If not, we can move on to the third item on the agenda, which is the presentation by our colleagues in research, development and innovation. And I'd like to welcome Dr. Beth Sage, Director, and Francis Hines, Manager of RD&I, to give an overview of their work to the board. And we already have the presentation in our Teams channel. So over now to Beth, and you are very welcome.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present on our work. I've got a very bad echo on my line. I hope no one else can. I hope the sound is all right for other people.
That's okay.
Wonderful. So I will, please just bear with me whilst I share my presentation. No.
I'll see if I can do it for you. Oh, there we are.
Okay. Can everyone see the presentation?
Okay, you can see it. Can
Yes,
you
we can.
enlarge it, please?
Yeah, let me see. No, I don't want to do that. I actually, oops, apologies. I think that's as large as I can make it. Is it not viewable?
It's fine. It's fine.
Okay. So, as I say, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to present to you today. Really, I just wanted to give everyone a little snapshot of what we do in RD&I, and then I guess pose a few questions for you at the end. So for those of you that don't know anything about RD&I, my name is Beth Sage and I recently took over as RD&I Director. I'm a chess consultant within NHS Highland and have a strong research interest, particularly with relating to clinical research. We have really quite a simple vision and purpose in RD&I, and that really is one of our founding principles, which is to transform health outcomes for the Highlands, both patients, carers and residents, through excellence in research, service development and innovation. And everything we do is around supporting that vision and purpose. So who are we? Well, we have actually quite, I would say, a modest size unit, so anywhere between 55 to 60 staff, depending on some of our temporary contracts. And there's a good range of expertise there, both clinical, from research nurses to research doctors, clinical data managers, and then also our governance and QA staff. We have a full innovation team, So we have really quite a broad range of skills working with us within the division. We get our funding from a huge number of different income streams, and we have an income of about £2 million annually. The majority of our income actually comes from individual either innovation or research projects, and we get about £1 million from those two sources of income, so almost half. We get some core funding from the Chief Scientist Office, and we get some money from an innovation testbed. We get a small amount of recurrent funding and core funding from various cancer research networks and from NHS Highland, and a small amount of commercial revenue. And obviously the majority of our spend is on staff, and we have a small, and largely those are our project specific staff, although we do have some core funded staff as well. We have some non-capital cost, and a small amount goes into growth and strategic resourcing. So what sort of things do we do? I guess the most traditional thing that most people would expect us to do is clinical trials research, and we have a particularly strong background in both cancer and haematology trials. We're running about 59 to 60 studies, and they vary from clinical trials of investigational medicinal products to device trials. And we normally recruit about 100 patients a year into oncology related trials. We also have a huge non-cancer trials capacity. And again, this ranges between clinical trials of investigational medicinal products to device trials. We support people doing PhDs, registry studies, surveillance studies, and we probably recruit about 9,000 patients a year into non-cancer related studies. And I guess what's the main benefit to our patients? Well, they get access to new drugs that they wouldn't otherwise get, and they get that within the safety of a clinical trial with all of the monitoring that goes with that. We know that in particular cancer patients generally have better outcomes if they're enrolled in clinical trials than if they're on standard of care. We contribute to significant drug savings for the board, and we contribute then obviously in the larger sense to global drug development. We do also contribute to academic outputs, and that increases our profile for NHS Highland. So within service development, we are focusing largely on service design and service redesign, but we do have skills in business case development. We're able to look at service evaluations. We look at systems flows and identifications of opportunities for innovation within services. And just a couple of case studies that we've done very recently that I thought might be of interest to you is I've picked out two. So the first one is called Joint Academy. This is working with a commercial company, and this is online supported physiotherapy. It's delivered on a patient who enrolls would get one-to-one access with an online supported physio, with the aim to improve physical activity and symptom management. And this is looking at addressing the needs of patients, particularly on the waiting list for hip and knee surgery. And the outcome of that service development would be to see if we can reduce the number of patients who actually actively feel like they want a hip or knee replacement. And this is something that the Scottish Government have been quite interested in, obviously with the significant delays in waiting lists at the moment. Another really interesting project we've been involved in recently is called the Melody system, and this is looking at robotic diagnostic ultrasounds. And the aim of this is that you have an expert operator site, which is your hub, and then you're able to have a less experienced patient site in your spokes. And the central expert site is able to operate remotely the ultrasound machine that is with the patient at the distant site. So you can concentrate your clinical expertise and your diagnostic expertise in, for example, Regmore, but you could deliver the same level of diagnostic ultrasound to patients in Caithness or Skye or Fort William to try and reduce the need both for patient travel and for operator travel. And so that's been piloted initially within diagnostic echocardiogram within cardiology, and we are currently undergoing further evaluation in obs and gynae, trauma, and some renal imaging as well. We have a huge innovation department, and it's one of the areas in which we focus on particularly. And a lot of our innovation is around driving system change and taking a whole systems approach to various problems. We've got a lot of expertise in digital health, in remote service delivery, particularly interested in environmental impact and reducing carbon footprint. So we're looking at green theatres. And we've got particular interest at the moment in palliative care and end of life innovations that we're looking at, that we are in the process of investigating at the moment. So again, I guess just to pick up a case study that I thought people might be interested in is, again, relating really to our carbon footprint and our green theatres, is we're working with a company called Tiny Air to look at improved pre-cleaning of surgical instruments. So currently surgical instruments in the decontamination unit are cleaned by hand, which requires significant amounts of hot water, detergent and time. But there is a company that we're working with that have made a similar machine to do the same job, but using cold water in a significantly reduced time. And that's an innovation project we've got ongoing at the moment. And if successful and you scale that up across the NHS, there would be a significant saving in terms of time, in terms of water consumption and detergent use, which clearly from an environmental perspective would be excellent. So what are the benefits to the health board of having an RD&I department that's active? I wanted again to just pick out a couple of things that we've highlighted, I guess, over the last 2 years. I don't think we can get through a presentation without some mention of COVID. And we were particularly active during COVID. We ran 15 COVID-related studies within RD&I, and we recruited over 1,000 patients. We were part of the recovery trial, which is, for those of you that don't know, was the really groundbreaking platform treatment trial that meant our patients could get, again, really cutting edge treatments within the safety of that clinical trial setting. We developed a really excellent working relationship with clinicians on the ground floor within the COVID unit. And at a time that was quite difficult, I think, for staff, a lot of them commented on how positive they felt about being involved in clinical research. And we had a really excellent recruitment rate for our patients. So in the region of 70% of our patients approached to be enrolled in recovery were randomized and received a treatment. We've also been involved in the data surveillance study for ISARIC and Siren, which is the UK-wide NHS staff surveillance study. And we're currently enrolling patients in Panoramic, which is the primary care-based antiviral study. So in addition to the clinical benefits for our patients, we also provide some significant financial benefits. So we estimate that we save the board approximately £500,000 per year in drugs costs. And this is largely because through our work with neurology and oncology, a lot of those drugs are quite expensive. And if patients are enrolled in a clinical trial, you're saving them the cost of standard of care medication, and the drugs cost are usually covered by the trial. So where do we want to go in the future? Well, one of the key things that we want to achieve is closer alignment with the NHS board and its strategy. I think it's really important that we become embedded and central to helping NHS Highland achieve their core goals and strategies. We're looking to expand and support clinical academics, and we've got a number of interesting projects in the pipeline, particularly supporting recruitment to the National Treatment Centre, and looking at working with the Royal College of Surgeons to develop a surgical education research and innovation lab, which is being led by Ken Walker. We want to ensure that evaluation is at the core of all of service redesign that we're involved in. We talk a lot about how can we redesign our services for patients, but we need to make sure there's a robust evaluation process that goes alongside that to ensure the way we're redesigning things have real value for our patients and our health services. We're looking to improve the equality of access to clinical research for NHS Highland patients. That can be very difficult geographically, but we work hard on improving that, and that's definitely something we need to further expand. And we'd like to see greater integration across NHS Highland with RD&I, with our strategy and transformation group, eHealth, etc., to ensure that we're not working as silos, but that we can be supportive of all of our departments within NHS Highland that are looking to use research or innovation. So what are we asking of the board? I guess the first thing is to think of us. So if you have a problem, if you're looking to, address a service problem, think of us, talk to us. Are there innovations we can support with? Are there companies that we know are interested in that particular field? How can we help implement it, evaluate it, assess it? Really, it's more about what can we do for you as a board than what you can do for us. And so I guess just think of us, talk to us, and consider us as part of your future. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Beth. And maybe if you can take down the presentation now, and we can have an opportunity to raise questions. I'm sure that your fascinating overview of all of the activities in which you're engaged will have stimulated colleagues' questions. I just wanted to start, Beth, by asking how much are you integrated with the work of the Centre for Sustainability in the Golden Jubilee?
So we're part of a number of high-level organisations and sort of cross-Scotland networks. Frances may have a better idea if I'm hoping she's in the meeting as well, in terms of the exact linking and contribution, but certainly if it's not something we're particularly involved in, so I'm interested in it personally from a cancer perspective and early cancer diagnostics. Within RD&I, I don't know exactly what link-ins we have, but maybe Frances can clarify that.
Yep. So basically, most of the innovation work that's coming out of the Scottish Government and also all of the Scottish Government supported centres are part of our work, and we have direct links into all of them. So anytime something comes up new from innovation through SHIP, which is the Scottish Health Innovation Partnership, then we get directed towards the Centre for Sustainability as well. We're all very well linked in.
Thanks, both. I have several people wanting to come in, starting with Graham.
Thank you. That was very interesting. Great to hear that that work goes on, often in the background, I'm sure. I'm keen to understand how priorities for the work that the centre does, how the priorities are determined, and just a wee bit more about fit with the rest of the NHS, both in Scotland and across the UK. Thanks.
So as projects come in, so we've been discussing recently within our division around strategic priorities going forward, Graham. So I think that's a really valuable question. I guess our first question is always, when anything comes in, is why should we do it? So is there a need? Do our patients have a specific need, or is there a value across Scotland for this particular project or innovation? And we really take it from there, and we have a quite a clear decision-making process when every project comes in. There are specific areas that I think we're definitely stronger in. So we have really excellent resourcing for neurology trials. So one of our neurologists, Javier, is really prolific and very sought after to be a PI for neurology trials, and we know we have a lot of neurology, and in particular multiple sclerosis, motor neurone disease within the Highlands, and so that's definitely an area of focus. In terms of innovation, we're doing a lot of work within palliative care and end-of-life care, so that's also a strategic priority for us moving forward. We're always looking at how we can improve access and overcome inequalities in access to healthcare. So again, any innovations or trials that come in relating to overcoming inequalities in access are important to us. In terms of link-ins, I might hand over to Frances, who's got fingers in many pies of all of the networks we're involved in, and she'll be able to talk about that in more detail.
Yeah, so it depends whether we're looking at research, development or innovation. In research, we are part of the Scotland-wide research network structure. We get funding from some of them, for example, the Cancer Research Network, the Primary Care Research Network, the Neurology Network and so on. And we also get contacted, obviously, by all of the others. There's about 9 of them. So we're very, always very up to, talk to those guys. And then in the innovation side of it, we are fully part of all the innovation activity that's happening through the NHS in Scotland. We are part of the North of Scotland Innovation Group, which is Tayside, Grampian, us and the 3 island boards. There are 3 innovation groups in Scotland, and we are fully involved in all of the SBRIs that are coming out. So there are 12 SBRIs coming out this year. That's small business research initiatives, and they're looking at everything from cancer diagnostics to dementia to mental health to all sorts of other things. If anybody's interested, I can tell you about that. And of course, as we're supported by the Scottish Government through the CSO, I actually sit on most of the committees with the CSO representing all of the small boards in Scotland, the Dunfermline Group boards. So we're pretty clued up as to actually what's going on, and we all work together very much. But again, if people want to know more, I'm happy to say.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. Thanks very much, Beth, for that. A very interesting presentation. Two things. Firstly, leading on a bit from what Graham asked, we seem to have in Highland a couple of areas health-wise where patients seem to be, for want of a better word, more affected by the disease than any other parts of the country. I'm thinking of multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, etc. Is that an area where the research is already focused, or is that something that you've got to wait until specific projects come in before you can get the funding, before you can do it? And the second thing was on your future directions bit, or for future part of the presentation, you mentioned more integration. How can we as a board help you get that? Is there blockers in there that is stopping that integration? How can we help you do that? Thanks.
Great questions. Francis, I don't know, do you want to answer the first one?
So yeah, obviously we do have specific clinical areas that are of concern to the whole of the Highlands, and neurology specifically. MS is one of those. We know we've got a large number of patients. We've always had that focus, but it was very much stimulated when Javier Artel turned up. He is the premier principal investigator in the UK. Every company comes to us for him. So we are recognised as probably the key place to come in the UK to do MS research. We do have a couple of other diseases. We haven't got a rheumatologist at the moment in Raigmore who can do research, but we're still doing it. Nevertheless, with some other PIs, some research doctors. And in addition to that, in our innovation cluster, we have a focus on Lyme disease. So we're doing 6 projects on Lyme disease. Some of them are academic and European funded. Pfizer is getting us to do a study looking at data and incidence accuracy. So that's an interesting one, but it really depends on what people come and say to us. It depends on our PIs, and it depends on our understanding of what's actually going on in Highland. So we spend a lot of time looking at all of that.
And I think, Alex, in answer to the question about how you can help in terms of increasing integration, I guess, and removing roadblocks. So I think some of it is we're already making some progress on having a structure when projects that come in. We call it the Innovation Infrastructure Group that Francis has set up. And that's ensuring that we've got all of the key players for most innovation or research projects in a single meeting. So e-health, estates, facilities, procurement, tech, so that early barriers might be identified and overcome. So you've got the right people in the table at the right time. But I guess having that on a systems-wide approach. So I think the real barrier is a lot of things work within either this is the division of medicine, or this is the division of surgery, or this is community. And actually, innovation really crosses all of those. So if you're looking at a service redesign or an innovation to change how you deliver a service, you need to look at the knock-on effects to all of the key stakeholders in that. And I think that's where the biggest barrier probably is that, projects tend to sit within very traditional hierarchical structures, but actually innovation needs to cross all of that. And so I guess from my perspective, it would be that if you're as a board being approached about something like this, that's one of the questions you raise to the people that are bringing it. So how is this going across the system? How does this affect other systems? What have you done to look at that? And have you thought about speaking to RD&I? Because we do have contacts in all of those areas, and a lot of our projects do cross specialty.
Brian, followed by David.
Thank you very much. As most of you know, I took over as head of the School of Health, Social Care and Life Sciences at UHI a few months ago. So I've certainly been taking a little bit of time, taking stock of where we are, and had a few conversations with Beth and actually several of you in the meeting today. So it's just to it's more of a comment really, just to say that 2 or 3 things. One, we share the same objectives around research and development, which is really about the impact on the Highlands. We will be writing a new research strategy, which is very much based on the important issues for the region. But also my own background, career interest has been very much about research capacity, capability building in the NHS across all of the professions. And I've done various things at a national level. So I think there's some really exciting synergies there where we can start to work together to start to explore how we can share elements of strategy, environment, complementarity of skill sets. I think we've done okay in the past, but I think there's an awful lot more that we can actually do, and I think we're better placed now than we ever have been in the past. So I'll continue those ongoing conversations, but from everything I've seen so far, and I've worked with many health boards across Scotland, incredibly impressed by everything that's going on in NHS Highland, the skill sets, actually the level of professionalism as well. It's really impressive. So we'll be looking forward to exploring new ways of working together to mutual benefit, but ultimately for the Highlands over the next few years. So it's just a general comment on that one. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you, Brian. And as you know, we've met a few times already, and I'm also really excited about developing that wider relationship, and I think there's real promise for collaborations moving forward. So very happy to continue those conversations. And I think your interest in capacity building for research, so certainly within Scottish Government, that's a huge priority, and I think that became very clear during the pandemic, was how critical clinical research is to clinical service delivery, and the two should not be seen as separate but actually interlinked. And that's one of the things that we're looking at supporting, and one of the drivers behind supporting clinical academics more locally, so that we can really combine the research element with clinical practice for best outcomes.
David, followed by Pam.
Thanks, and I just want to say thanks to Beth and Francis for their presentation. I've had the pleasure of working with them more closely in the last few months, but over the years, I suppose. And the time doesn't give it justice to both the quantity and the quality of work that they do on behalf of the board. I suppose one thing to think on it is that where the funding comes from is based on their ability to demonstrate capability. It's not like the rest of our funding. It's much more on a private funding business, if you like. And they're able to attract that regular funding through the success of the projects that they deliver on and the reputation that they have both nationally and locally. I think the other spin-off touch point that Beth mentioned is that as we seek to attract consultants to the board, many consultants are interested in research and development and innovation. And this is an added strength for us while we are attracting those people. And as Francis mentioned, there's space for more that we can get further involved in. And again, just working and connecting locally, Brian's mentioned that I've been involved working with the HIE as well as UHI and trying to make sure that we can align ourselves as best as possible to take advantage of opportunities of innovation within the Highlands. Thanks.
Thanks, David. Can I just come back on that? Sorry. You know, the finance is really is a really important point to raise, David. You know, financially, we are very vulnerable to fluctuations in clinical trial activity, project activity. So our finances are always precarious, and more so coming out of COVID. Recruitment of PIs that can run trials is a real I guess is a limiting factor for us. So anything that we can do to support recruitment of clinical academics and encourage them to be able to continue research within sort of their core job plan, and it be considered and valued as part of their core role rather than as an aside if you've got spare time. And that's one of the key drivers within the cancer, so certainly within the cancer research government strategy that I'm involved in writing. And you know, without the PIs, we can't recruit to trials because we can't open the trials. Those trials can't be successful and we can't generate income. So that support of our clinical services, our clinical colleagues, radiology, all of the ancillary services that we rely on to deliver these trials efficiently and effectively, you know, we're very vulnerable to fluctuations in clinical demand. So, you know, it's a very important point that you've raised.
So Pam and then Boyd.
Thanks, Boyd. Thanks again, Beth and Francis. Always really stimulated to hear about the work that's going on in your area. And, you know, I think your kind of line about think of us when you're doing stuff is really one that we need to hold on to. You know, we're about to work through a strategy and launch it. We'll be looking at our annual delivery plan, but actually, you know, what is the transformation and opportunity within that? And at a time when sometimes we're guilty of doing what we've always done and then wondering why we're getting what we've always got, I'm not sure we think of you enough. So I think it's that starting with, you know, what's the problem that we're trying to solve and who else might take a different look at it through a different lens and may come up with something that we've not a clue about that would be transformational. So I think the key message to us is to think of you as we move forward as a first point of reference, not an end point. And also that evaluation piece, I couldn't agree enough. I think we don't always understand enough about the impact of what we do, and therefore again we could be guilty of repeating the same mistakes. So for me, this is hugely important. The timing's right. What a resource. How lucky are we? And together with the conversations I've had with Brian and others, and as David set out, we've got an opportunity here in this space to push this on a bit and to look at how we need to value you in that space and make you front and centre. So thank you, and I think it's the right time for us.
Thanks, Pam.
Boyd.
Thanks. So I'll just join in the thank yous. I was very pleased that I'm the exec to which RDI reports, but I'm not precious about that. I think RDI is relevant right across all of our domains. But the conversations we've been having over the last year and a half have been around where are we going with our RDI? It is what it is. It's got to where it's got to, and it's trying to create that sense of direction and hopefully growth, and also the idea that perhaps we could promote a sort of Highland Centre of Excellence on certain areas. Now, as described, projects come across a whole range of things, and they always will. The people doing research have a whole range of interests, and it's not for us to dictate all of that. But I do think that there will be scope to create a unique branding for research done in the Highlands, and that's what we've been mindful of. Very pleased to be linking into the Together We Care strategy as well, and the RDI strategy will feed up and into that, and will align with it. I think the future is bright, but we do look for internal sponsors and requests for help as much as we look for the external, across the UK and internationally. There can be interest in research being done here, and it's great to bring it to board today and to get it into people's heads, to raise awareness and to put it on the map so that NHS Highland can be rightfully proud. So thanks again.
Thanks, Boyd. And again, actually, just to come on to that point that you've raised around people seeking us out for research. So there is no doubt, again, since COVID, one of the real highlights was inequality in access to care, inequalities in access to research. And so a number of companies are now are approaching us because of our remote and rurality, because of our unique needs. And it's a real time to build on that and to expand on that and be a centre that people come to in order to not just do the research in the same traditional manner within an urban setting that may have less relevance to our specific population. And that has to be one of our unique points is, this is where we develop our expertise. This is where people come to and they actively seek us out to address those more challenging remote and rural needs.
Okay, thanks. We've come to the end of our time for this presentation, but I just wanted to thank Beth and Francis for coming along today and for giving us a really informative and enlightening and stimulating presentation. It was a long overdue spotlight on RD&I, and as Pam said, there's a lot to be taken forward and to be considered in the light of the development of our board strategy, as you yourself mentioned, Beth. Also in terms of other aspects that you mentioned, like service redesign, the NTC, and our links with UHI. And I think that there is much that could be derived from closer links with UHI going forward. And no doubt Brian will be in touch with you about that. But for now, I'd just like to thank you for getting us off to such a good start to a long day, and you're very welcome to stay for the remainder of the board meeting, though I suspect you might have other things to research.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And we move on now to the minutes of the meeting of the 29th of March and the action plan. And could I just go through the minutes for accuracy? Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Can't see any hands going up, so can I take it that these are approved? Yes, thumbs up. And the action plan, there's just, I think, one change to be made to that, Ruth, in terms of we now have a board meeting in June, so item 10 will be included in the special June meeting of the board. Ruth, is there anything else you want to draw to our attention from the action plan?
So yeah, just a couple of things, Boyd. Yes, the report will come to the board in June in relation to the healing process. The details of the wellbeing strategy, Fiona will address this in her report on the culture item later in the meeting. I believe the target date might need to move, so we'll capture that at the time of the culture item. Come to it. The draft strategy will be considered at the July board meeting. And the review of governance is on your board agenda for today's meeting. And the item at the very bottom of the action plan, you suspended your standing orders at the meeting to permit the board to extend a co-option arrangement onto the audit committee for a couple of years. So I'm actually, with your agreement, I'm planning to take that off the action plan because that has now been completed. I don't necessarily want to keep it there for another 2 years, just to remind you. If you're happy for me to do that, I'll send it.
Can I get an indication that you're happy to remove that item from the action plan? Okay, thank you. Are there any matters arising from the minutes or from the action plan? If not, can we go on to the Chief Executive's report and ask Pam to address us on the latest issues?
Good morning all, and I have a few points of note this morning. It's been a busy couple of months since we last met, so I think there's some things that we just kind of need to acknowledge that have happened. We probably would want to start with acknowledging the opening of both Broadford and Badenoch and Strathspey hospitals, the official opening by the Cabinet Secretary, Broadford on Friday past, and Badenoch and Strathspey on the 16th of May. So 2 really successful events attended by a number of local people involved in the project, local dignitaries. It both went really well, and very positive days for both those localities. So excellent facilities, state of the art for going forward into the future, and really positive and happy days for us. We also had a visit from Jason Leitch to meet with staff and to thank them for all their efforts. And he spent the day, obviously Highland's quite tricky to come for the day and meet everybody. So he did come to Inverness, met the exec team. He did go to Raigmore and up to New Craigs, and he beamed out via Teams to some of those teams that were more remote, and tried to do his best in terms of getting a bit of reach there, and I think that was well received. He's also due to go to Argyll and Bute for the day, which Fiona has organised, and I believe that's in July. So I think that that's good for morale and good for the staff to get that opportunity, and that thanks. Moving on to probably more serious matters, we had on the 28th of April the Public Audit Committee for our Section 22 report, and that report, following us giving evidence, we received confirmation that that report had now closed and that they were satisfied with the evidence presented, and that's a real milestone and important component for NHS Highland. Whilst we're still in very challenging times, as are all boards in Scotland, we are really pleased with the progress that we've made in that space, and the recognition of that, and the capability that we have to hopefully go on and address the ongoing challenges that will be financial, that will be culture, that will be leadership, that will be performance, that will be governance. But we're in a much stronger place to be continuing the work that we've done to date and strengthening our position. On the 4th of May, we had our annual review with Scottish Government. Again, another opportunity to reflect and demonstrate the progress that we've made, even through a pandemic. And again, we felt that that was positive. We've not yet had our feedback on that, but that will be reported in the future to you. So very busy couple of months, and big events, important events. and I think that we have come through these well. In terms of pressures, the pressures continue. So whilst the pandemic feels a little bit more quiet to the public and people are really starting to go about their business in a much more normal way, I really just want to take the opportunity again to re-emphasise that within health and social care, it feels anything but normal. We continue to be very challenged in unscheduled care right across the system, whether that be at the front door of our hospital or whether that be out in the community and in health and social care. Also mental health services, we must not forget the pressure that they are also under. And of course, with the impact of the pandemic, mental health, mental well-being has become an issue for people, as has the physical health of individuals. So we are dealing with unprecedented demand, with the sad state of people waiting to be seen and waiting for procedures. And we have got a lot of work to do in that space to recover fully from that. The staff are still experiencing relentless demand and activity, and we need to be really aware of that and their well-being in that space. And so again, just urging people to think about accessing healthcare and social care through the appropriate routes, and that will help us so that people are coming to the right place for the right care, but also to be, I guess, assured as we can be that we are trying to get ourselves in shape and to recover from what has been a really difficult time and remains so. Staffing is a big concern for us in another pressured area. I think, again, that's not unique to Highland, but when you get into the remote and rural context, it becomes even more complex, just as was set out in the previous presentation. And so trying to find different ways to attract and retain staff, and also to consider whether there are new roles that we could bring into play that would be more attractive for people locally to work for us, and address some of the things that need to be delivered. So staffing is a big area for us of focus, and National Education Scotland, NES, have agreed to work closely with us on perhaps, again, what change, what transformation could we bring to bear that might have an impact on that. I'm nearly there. Maternity, we've had our maternity planning event, and we had around 40 people at that. That was reported both from staff back to myself and from those involved from the corporate services as a very positive event, and people had found it useful to have that space to step back and think about what we're doing. We obviously won't be taking our foot off the accelerator there. We need to follow through, ensure those who weren't able to attend because they were doing their day job are fully involved in the outputs from that and the shape of that. And there are many things happening in the background to try and ensure that that happens. So we are continuing to progress with our planning, and with the aim of having a draft plan with milestones, or high level plan with milestones, by the end of June, that everybody feels they've had a say and a contribution to, particularly the voices of the people that use those services and our staff. We have, through the summer, children's inspection going on around children at risk of harm. I had an extraordinary meeting. I chaired the Chief Officers Group, which is the public protection group for Highland, to look at where we were at with that the other day in terms of preparation and moving forward. And it looks like we're in a reasonable shape and have got all the right people in the right place to progress that with our partners. So we will see what the end report looks like for that. We, just as was already noted, the healing process final report, as we draw that process to an end, it wasn't quite ready for this board meeting. The independent panel were still doing some refinement, so we're having an extra board meeting on the 28th of June to scrutinise that final learning report and ensure that we are taking all the lessons learned forward as should be the case. So I think that concludes all the points of note and the ongoing pressures and some of the highlights of what's going on and around for us. So thank you.
Thank you, Pam. A beefy report today, very full one, and a lot of ongoing activity. And I can just endorse what you said about how successful the hospital openings were in Aviemore and here in Broadford, and also your comments about PAPL's report and the closure of that and the annual review. All of these were successfully negotiated. Questions or contributions for Pam? Alex?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Thanks, Pam. Bit about maternity and a follow-up to what was on the Grampian News last night, particularly on the issue, excuse me, from Dr. Gray's, where there's obviously increasing political pressure coming through. They're talking about almost a decade before things are going to be back to consultant-led. The question, though, is about the freedom of information question that was asked about the number of people, or number of mothers rather, who had their children by the roadside in that travel from wherever they were within Moray to either Aberdeen or Raigmore. And I was surprised how high it was. They quoted 3. Have we got a similar information on the number of mothers from Caithness travelling to Raigmore who haven't quite made it to the hospital before they gave birth? Because that was the implication on the Dr. Gray's question. I'm just wondering, almost like heading off the chat question, on which is bound to come. Thanks.
Thanks, and I will bring Heidi in a minute. Yes, so at the moment I'm meeting weekly with the Chief Executive of Grampian and with Catherine Sutton and with the Chief Officer from Moray to look at transfers and what's going on, so that we can, you know, ensure that the pathway we've agreed is being used appropriately, and that the pathways then internal to Grampian are for them to manage in their own right. I'm aware of 2. I'm not aware of the third one of the roadside, which are very recent, and you know, I think it's important to highlight one was en route to Dr. Gray's internally in Moray. It wasn't, and one was to Aberdeen. So you know, this can happen in any circumstances, and actually the length of journey obviously is of greater concern for people, but it can happen even in shorter routes. So you know, the one internally in Moray was a relatively short route. So I think it's important just to balance that that thinking. But Heidi will be better able to tell you about our own position.
Thank you, Pam. So yes, Alex, we do monitor the figures very carefully in terms of any baby that, or babies indeed, that are born en route. We have relatively low numbers. I don't have them to hand, Alex, but I'm very happy to supply them to the board. We have very low numbers, and we put in an enormous amount of effort through our midwifery teams to make sure that we have really good and careful risk assessments for the women who are pregnant. We work very closely those one-to-one relationships between the midwife and the woman, so that the woman understands that early action needs to be taken when they go into labour. And not to delay. But of course we have real challenges around other things as well, weather. And I can remember a number of years ago we had a number of ladies who went into labour at the same time in Caithness, and we had to get them through the snow, and did so with the aid of the police, the public and the fire brigade, and that was a magnificent effort. So yes, we do have occasions when that happens. We monitor it carefully. We do everything that we can to prevent, and I'll get the figures to the board.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, Alex. Any further questions, points for Pam? If not, I think we can move on now to item 7, which is the Public Health Assurance Report, an update on COVID, which Pam alluded to, and I ask Tim to speak to this topic.
Good morning, Chair, and morning, members and others. I will look to share my screen. So hopefully members can see.
Yes.
Yes, great. Okay. Thank you for the introduction. The profile of COVID has certainly reduced in the media, and numbers of COVID cases have gone down, but it's important to maintain a watching brief and also to be aware of the other implications of COVID, which I will come on to. First of all, I just want to present a slide which is fairly familiar in type, which demonstrates the sort of progress of COVID numbers across NHS Highland. Members will remember the peaks in January and also the peaks more recently. The numbers have declined quite considerably over the past few weeks. The important thing to bear in mind, though, with this is that the testing policy has changed, and so we are testing far fewer people than we used to. So the accuracy of knowing how much COVID's in the community is an awful lot less. So we've got good reason to believe that the numbers are as shown on the chart, and we've got a very considerable decline in COVID across NHS Highland. But we do need to have a little bit of caution, and this slide shows something very similar to the last one, which is rates rather than numbers. There are other ways to tell how much COVID is around in the community. So even though the amount of testing has greatly reduced, and testing is now largely restricted to people in health or care settings, whether patients, residents or staff, and some of the people may find out that they're positive because of symptoms, but by and large all the community testing has gone. The one way to find out, other way to find out about how much COVID is in the community is a quite an innovative method of sewage monitoring, where sewage samples are tested for the amount of COVID virus in them, and that gives a fairly similar picture to the one that we've already had. It's a bit difficult to judge, particularly in a rural area like ours, and the places where the sampling's done is quite limited. But it does give a measure of reassurance around the amount of COVID in the community. The other way that we can judge, independent of the population testing, is through surveys, and the Office for National Statistics does a UK-wide survey using samples to see how much COVID there is in the community. I've got a couple of slides from that, really as a confirmation of our local picture, and you can see from the one that's up at the moment that this demonstrates a similar fall in community COVID numbers compared with the graphs I showed earlier. It's worth noting though that we continue with the ONS information. That does show that Scotland has retains a reasonably higher proportion of COVID cases compared with the rest of the UK, and judging by the albeit limited information that we get from community testing across Scotland, NHS Highland, and particularly the Highland Council area, is a bit higher than other parts of the country. So we're certainly have a much improved picture compared with several weeks ago. But again, we do need to be a little cautious. There are some outstanding issues that we need to be aware of. I'm not sure, given the nature of COVID, whether there will be further specific COVID updates at the board, but whether or not there are various issues that we need to take into account. There are continued infections. As I said, without the widespread community testing, we can't be sure how widespread that is. We know about places like care homes, but more widely, we are conscious that there may be renewed waves of infection. It's been talked about, maybe one perhaps later on in the summer, and perhaps something potentially in combination with flu later on in the year during the winter. So we need to be aware of that and the potential harm that can cause. And so what we need to consider, probably more really at a national than a local level, but around the local implementation, is how we balance any remaining measures of COVID control with what the risks of harm are and the inconvenience of those measures. So that may be wearing of face coverings in healthcare settings for visitors and staff who wouldn't normally wear them. It's things like widespread testing and how they, let's say for pre-admission, and how all that balances up is something that needs to be worked through predominantly at a national level over the next few weeks. But we need to be conscious of the potential for new variants. At the moment, we have the Omicron variant, and we started off with one called BA1, and we're now on to BA2, which is the predominant, by far and away the predominant COVID variant, with about 98%. And the difference in the variants has caused the new waves that we've had of infection. So there's always the chance of getting further variants, which may then complicate the picture and cause new waves. So there have been a couple of signal new variants in South Africa, again new variants of Omicron, but by and large the picture's been fairly quiet, although we need to be aware. Long COVID remains a major concern. It's not something that members may and have in the past asked some detailed questions around long COVID, and those questions probably I wouldn't be able to deal with today, but we'll be able to feed back, and members may want a further briefing on long COVID. But that is something that we need to be continually aware of, and the risk of further cases of long COVID, and also measures to control to help people who have long COVID. Vaccination remains the main way to control the disease in the future, and the following paper talks about the vaccination transformation programme and also COVID vaccination, but I'll return to that in the last couple of slides. And we also need to bear in mind the importance of social mitigation. The board has approved the social mitigation strategy and action plan, and combined with the other challenges, incredibly serious challenges that we face of rising prices and shortages and issues around employment and affordability. It is a huge issue that we need to continue to address. So just a couple of slides to finish off on vaccination as our major control measure. Overall, people of NHS Highland have been really enthusiastic about uptaking vaccination. There have been some hiccups on the way in terms of delivery, but certainly in terms of our overall adult population coverage, we have done better than the Scotland average across all 3 doses. Our coverage on the 4th dose, on the what people call the spring booster, hasn't been as good and is lagged behind other boards. This chart shows over 75s. Our picture continues to improve. One of the principal reasons for being lower than other boards is the slow start relating quite a lot to issues around lettering, incorrect letters going out, people needing to be rescheduled, and that put a delay, was clearly inconvenience to the individuals, and we do and we have apologised for that, but it's also delayed the programme as a whole. But we are catching up. The latest figures are now we're up to 79% of the population. So we're getting on for parity, and hopefully we'll overtake other boards. And where we're looking at particular areas of priority, notably care homes, the last figures I saw was our care home uptake was 79% against a Scottish average of 80%, and the gap of 20% or so is due to largely inability to vaccinate in care homes because of continuing outbreaks of COVID. So we are improving our position, and that's against a background of very good vaccination uptake. So I think that will suffice for the moment for the COVID update, but I'm very happy to take any questions, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you for the presentation, and invite now questions. Any questions for Tim?
I can see Anne's hand.
Good morning, everybody. I'm not sure, Boyd, if you're seeing my hand up or not.
Yeah.
I was going to ask this in the next item, but to give me 2 bites at the cherry, I'll ask it in this item instead, given we're talking about vaccination in both. I wondered if you could give us some assurance, Tim, that the difficulties that you refer to there in terms of letters and also some other issues in terms of the fit of the national programme with ourselves have been ironed out and are unlikely to be an issue as we go forward with vaccinations. Thank you.
Yes, I think most of the issues have been ironed out. I think that the challenge that we've got is that the system and the national system is fundamentally not designed for the environment that we have, and it's designed for more of an environment where there are a very small number of vaccination clinics, and the system's very centralised, and that's the way it's set up. We have clearly what's happened a few weeks ago was not the first time things have gone wrong, and so I can't give an absolute guarantee that we won't have problems again. But I think the experience of what's happened has led us to improve our systems, and I think the chances of having similar issues are far lower than they were. So I'm certainly give a perhaps a moderate or slightly more than moderate degree of assurance around that that we won't get the problems, and I'm certainly be more confident that we won't get the problems to the extent that we've had before. I'm reluctant to be very more optimistic than that, simply because we've had the serious issues, but we're working really hard. Having had serious letter issues twice, we're really working hard to make sure it doesn't happen a third time, and we're getting the systems more in both in line with nationally, and talking to the people nationally to make sure that they're more in line with what we deliver. So I am perhaps slightly more than reasonably confident that for the programmes that we have later on in the year, particularly the flu and COVID programmes in the autumn and winter, that we will have a far better system, which is better for our residents.
And did you want to do that?
Yes, I did, thanks. Probably just to add a little bit of what Tim's saying. So we've got to remember where we started. So the national system was built in 6 weeks. And done to that spec that we'd rely on a smaller number of sites being used for vaccination. At that time, we worked with the National Centre to try and get it working, the system working with our GP practices. We did a trial and we couldn't get it to that space in the time that we had with the national team. So they tried to support us in the first round and couldn't quite get us there. I sit on the National Vaccination Portfolio Board, and they completely recognise that the system needs development for remote and rural and multiple sites. And so they are absolutely working on that, but it's not, I don't think it's an easy fix, because it's much more complex to achieve that. So we have been caught this time in the midst of a system that's not quite built to fulfil our needs, and us trying to squeeze our needs into that. And so that work will continue, and as Tim says, we've addressed that, and I think that needs to be thought of, although it'll feel like the same thing because it had the same impact. The issues we had with the last round were because we were trying to manage it internally and we didn't have the setup fully developed. Again, we didn't completely understand. We were on a learning journey, and the capacity requirements, which we quickly rectified on recognising we weren't in the right place and turned that around. So this is a journey of learning and development, which is no consolation to the public. I get that, but behind the scenes there are a lot of things to consider. The one bit that we absolutely need to stay on top of and we recognise is our communication. And again, we perhaps haven't been proactive enough or understood enough what the public need to know in order to feel confident that their vaccination's coming. They don't have to travel from Caithness to Elgin, as was one example, which of course would be ridiculous, and that they have confidence in what we're doing. So I think there's a bit about the balance of, this has been quite a learning journey at scale, and the way in which we have to deliver it, and the system that we've been asked to use. And actually, if we can get it working as a far more efficient way for us to operate, it is all part of that design. And I think you said fit, is it a fit for our board area, the way that we're doing things? And I think that is still a question for us, and one that we're working through at the moment in terms of how we've done things traditionally and how we're trying to do things now, which is in line with policy and the agreements around the GP contract. However, if our analysis shows that we need to think or challenge that, then I think we need to bring that forward and have those debates. But as it stands at the moment, we are trying to deliver the national policy in line with the GP contract as is expected. And things, but we need to make sure that if there is an argument to challenge that further, that we understand that argument and take that through due process. So that's kind of where I'm at. Remote and rural, much more complex to deliver. And are we making it more complicated than need be at a time when funds are tight and staffing's not abundant?
Thanks, Pam. Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Tim, I didn't quite catch it in your presentation. I'm assuming that the numbers in the hospitals have dropped in line with the reduction in the numbers of rates of cases of COVID. Have you got a feel, and perhaps it's not you, perhaps it's Catherine or Pam can answer this, have you got a feel for when we're going to start putting the hospitals back together in the configuration that they were pre-COVID? Assuming that we don't need to have the distance between beds, etc., so that we can increase the capacity of the hospitals. Has that already happened? If it hasn't happened, are we going to go forward with that soon? Or is it a case of the lessons we've learned from COVID are such that to reduce hospital infections or hospital-acquired infections, we're actually going to keep the configurations to where we have it just now in terms of COVID? Thanks.
Yeah, if I can kick off, and then others may want to join. In terms of the numbers in hospitals, yes, the numbers have certainly very considerably gone down. People are still being tested in hospitals, so we know that we're getting the occasional COVID outbreak. Symptoms tend to be less serious, a lot less serious than they were. COVID is still a disease that can cause very serious disease and can be potentially fatal. So we do need to remember that, but indeed numbers have gone down. It affects, of course, both the staff and the patients or in care homes, the residents, and we're also seeing far fewer people testing positive among the staff. Hasn't gone away though, perhaps in terms of what we might think from the numbers. If we look at care homes, there were still over somewhere between 10 and 20 for the last couple of weeks that are either being closed to admissions or under investigation because of COVID concerns. So that's still a lot, and there's still some degree of pressure on the system. I think it's an interesting comment around going back to pre-COVID work. I think that to some extent that will be possible in terms of infection control, although we've learned lessons from COVID in general, and particularly I think probably more so for care homes than for hospitals. There are some of the lessons we've learned for care homes around infection control, which will be particularly useful to keep on with. And it used to be the case that outbreaks of other infectious diseases could perhaps be expected, or were not perhaps dealt with as or perhaps happened more often than we might think would be appropriate. And I think what COVID has demonstrated is that good infection control practice can be very effective in controlling a whole range of diseases. So I think we'll probably need to come to keep some of the measures that have been put in place for COVID further into the future. I think a lot of the issues that we've got in terms of patient flow and how the whole systems are managed have, I suppose, been there with COVID, but haven't that been apparent. So I think when it comes to patient flow and patient management, there's a lot more work that needs to be done external to COVID, and it won't be a question of going back to how things were before COVID, but it's how we look at the system to work most effectively once the pandemic has gone, both bearing in mind measures for infection control, but also looking at how the system can be managed better. But it may be from that able to comment further.
Okay, anybody else want to come in on that? Don't see any hands. Oh, Boyd.
Yeah, I think the subject is the public health update and the obviously infections, of which there's not just COVID is the discussion, but I suppose if the hospital focus is part of the discussion, the issues that are most affecting the way the whole system works, including hospitals, is probably not COVID. It's a factor in it in terms of the ways of working more than the presence of the infection. And additionally, what's described as flow for a patient pathway in and out of various spheres of care in the community or in the hospital, these have all changed as a result of the pandemic and the new ways of working, and probably some other factors as well. So actually, in terms of what happens in some of the care pathways, it's very complicated, but interestingly, the COVID infection itself, while still, as Tim says, present and has some hazard level, it is way down the list of factors in why we have the challenges that we see day to day in the running of various aspects of the whole system. And so I just wanted to give a little perspective that COVID's a kind of in there somewhere, but it's quite far down the list issue in terms of the generality of providing the services which something like an NHS board has to provide to the public that it serves.
Thanks, Boyd. Joanne.
Yeah, thanks, Boyd. Tim, just a question around the stats and the graph about the lower low kind of numbers in the uptake. I just wondered if you got a breakdown of areas and communities within Highland, and whether it gave you any insight into why the uptake might be lower in specific areas. Does it give us any kind of clues as to what's going on within Highland? Thank you.
Thanks. We get some degree of breakdown. I mean, because the numbers for this particular element of the programme are relatively small. The smaller that we look at, probably the harder it is to learn lessons. The simplest way to split that up clearly will be Argyll and Bute versus North Highland, and Argyll and Bute uptake, as has been the case through almost all the vaccination programme, has been higher. Our overall uptake now for the spring booster for over 75, so I said it's about 79%. It's somewhere around 74% within North Highland, and well over 80%, probably about 85% for Argyll and Bute, and that reflects the ways that the systems are set up. Staff availability, clinic availability. There are a range of things which, throughout the vaccination programme, have been different. Within North Highland as well, there are differences in the different localities, and that's reflected, you'll see in the next paper, to some extent in the way that different localities are delivering vaccination. So it probably mostly it's around staff availability. I think that the uptake from the enthusiasm of people to take up the vaccine is probably about the same throughout the whole of NHS Highland. But in some areas, getting that organisation for, as what Pam's alluded to in terms of the new system, can be harder in some areas than others. But as I said, across the board, we are improving. But I think bits of North Highland are certainly a little bit slower than some of the rest.
Sorry. Are we happy to note Tim's report and presentation? Yeah. And can we move on to the vaccination strategy, and back to you, Tim, to talk to your paper?
Thank you very much. the paper that I'm presenting is an update on the overall vaccination strategy. I've talked a bit around the COVID vaccination strategy, which has been the dominant feature over the last few months, and combined with that, we've also had the flu vaccination, which have and that's largely been done together. The background to vaccination development and vaccination strategies, the vaccination transformation programme, which has been implemented by Scottish Government in tandem with the development of the new GP contract. NHS Highland has been somewhat behind the curve compared with other boards. The expected implementation of VTP was by April this year. There is scope for transition, but to a large extent within NHS Highland, things were still under development in the run-up to the current financial year. We've been able to learn a lot from the COVID and flu programmes, particularly as our vaccination programme was almost entirely GP delivered. The VTP has a vaccination programme which has very limited GP delivery, but as we developed board clinics for COVID and flu, we were able to learn a range of lessons around how the programmes could appropriately be implemented. There are various challenges to the range of different programmes, and Appendix 1 in the paper shows the very wide range of vaccination programmes that there are. In terms of volume, the volumes for COVID are higher than other vaccinations, but closely followed by flu vaccinations. Others are lower, but that doesn't mean that they're less important. And particularly, we need to bear in mind the importance of the childhood vaccination programmes. There are diseases such as measles, or more recently, types of meningitis, which have largely disappeared from the country, and we forget about them potentially at our peril, because there is risk of those coming back. So what's important with these programmes is to have appropriate time scale and also appropriate assurance of the highest uptake that we can get for those cohorts. It is a complicated picture because of the different types of delivery. There's also the delivery of school vaccinations, which has been carried out by school nursing staff in the past, and separate from the vaccination transformation programme and the GP contract, but related in terms of policy direction and the type of approach that we need is the transformation and transition of those services from school nursing to other delivery, allowing for school nurses to do other activity improving the health of young people. The system that we have in place now for vaccination is to have a commission document which sets out what the services that we want to be delivered in the area are, and then the community teams led by the two chief officers are then tasked with the arrangements for the delivery of those programmes. And what the paper sets out in Appendix B is outlines of how the vaccination programmes are being delivered both or separately within North Highland, Argyll and Bute. And what I'm asking within the paper is for those to be noted, whereas the overall approach to the to immunisation to be approved. And essentially the reason for that is it's still a developing picture. We have yet to have confirmation of all the funding available, certainly for the COVID and for the expanded flu vaccination programme. There is certainly quite a high risk of a gap there, and we're still working to reduce that gap to aim for economies within the delivery and also the support structures, which by and large are common across North Highland, Argyll and Bute, to be able to live within the budget that we have. So that's a particular risk to notice the finance. Another significant risk to notice is recruitment, that moving from a GP-led service to a board delivered service, which has a seasonal pattern of delivery, in that the actual volume of delivery is extremely high at certain times of the year, but low, although certainly not non-existent, especially given the comments I made about childhood vaccinations, at other times of the year is an HR challenge, and also given the challenges that we have as a whole, as a board, around recruiting professional staff. There is further work to do to finalise the models, and that's still why Appendix B is there to give, I think, a fairly solid indication of where we are moving, but we've still got a little bit of a way to go. Vaccinations are being delivered appropriately at the moment. Many are being continued to delivered within primary care, while the other model is developed. There are parts of the board area which will continue with primary care delivery, particularly the islands, some of the islands. There is a process for assessment of that nationally, but as has been alluded to before, the national system really is set up for a more urban environment and doesn't necessarily fit well with what we need to deliver. Members will be aware of a level of dissatisfaction among many communities around how vaccinations are being delivered. We have the GPs and the practice staff to thank over the years, and also particularly for COVID, for the fantastic work that has been done alongside, of course, board employed colleagues, volunteers, armed forces, Scottish Ambulance Service, and a range of others in terms of delivering the COVID vaccinations. And many residents wish to have that continued. What we are faced with, of course, is a government policy which is, as part of vaccination transformation programme, to have vaccination delivered out with general practice, to allow GPs to do other services which may be more complicated and more definitive that they need to do. So we are still trying to sort of square that circle and get a system which is above all good for our citizens, and which allows people to have that vaccination in somewhere that they are happy with, done by appropriate professionals, and people don't have to travel too far. So there is still further work to do, but this paper demonstrates both the direction of the strategic direction of travel, and also the progress in delivering to those objectives.
Thank you, Tim. Can I invite questions and contributions? We've already touched on some of this in the previous item, but further develop some of these points. Sarah?
Thank you, Board, and thank you, Tim, for taking us through that. And you've indeed picked up on a lot of the points that I wanted to ask about, but I wonder if we could delve a little bit further into that. So I fully recognise the difficult position we are in as a board, and picking up on what you just said there about balancing the need to adhere to Scottish Government policy, but also recognising the challenges around our geography and our rurality. And I just wanted to ask a bit more about our approach to that, recognising in the appendix where we have picked up on the challenge delivering to some of the smaller islands, and there was the rural options appraisal where we've kind of worked through that route and looked at how we might deliver that. But I wonder more broadly about how equitable this will be for people in our communities, and I'm not just talking about the islands or the small islands, but will there be a full equalities impact assessment on all the solutions? And I'm thinking that, you know, you don't necessarily need to go very far outside of our busy places for things like public transport or other barriers to present themselves, particularly for people whose circumstances may make those things difficult, you know, and we think about some of the difficulties accessing childcare in some areas, and people with disabilities being able to use public transport, or the affordability. So I just wonder kind of how, obviously we are somewhat restricted as to what we can do, but even if we could do a very thorough equalities impact assessment on all the solutions, so that we're aware of the barriers that people in our communities might be facing and what we might be able to do to mitigate that. And I also just wanted to pick up on the point that you've made about the workforce risk. That concerns me greatly. We know we have a lot of challenges recruiting in a lot of different areas to a lot of different posts, and I think the idea of recruiting to these dedicated centres is a real concern to me, and just would be interested to know what work we have planned to try and find a practical solution to that. Thank you.
Thanks, Eva. I mean, the two things that you raise are quite linked together, and I think just to do the second one first, one thing that I suppose is interesting is to think around how vaccinations have been delivered before. And we have been able to deliver vaccinations, and we have been able to deliver COVID and flu vaccinations in an extended way, albeit in very different circumstances. So the system can work. I think the question is how we can make it work, with avoiding doing things like taking the staff capacity out of practices and moving it somewhere else when people did vaccinate in practices. So it has worked before, and it's just getting that transition to make sure it can be working. It may be, for example, that the same people at peak times who were vaccinated within practices are able then to vaccinate in board-led clinics, or that we're able to get a system which works in a similar way. There will be some degree of potential for collaborative working, particularly as is outlined in the paper, the potential for working with CTAC, community treatment and care services. However, we need, in order to give the vaccinations, there is an amount of staff that is needed to give a certain number of vaccinations, and the more people travel to have to go to particular locations, potentially the more time that takes if people aren't living in those locations. But it may be that there are many vaccinators who we can use who have vaccinated within primary care who live closer to there. So I think there is work that's carrying on, trying both to get to work more efficiently with the different types of service that can be provided, and also to use staff who have done vaccinations before. And there are some creative solutions. Vaccination is something which many people may wish to do either towards the end of their careers, or perhaps to come back from retirement for a time during the year to be able to do that. So we're open to a range of things, but it's not an easy thing at all to do, and we are very conscious of the HR risk. In terms of the equalities, I entirely agree. We need to do that, and monitoring equalities is a fundamental part of the vaccination programme, and there are a whole range of different inequalities that we look at, whether that's around income, around geography, or around ethnicity, and others that we look at. And of course, as well as the formal inequalities impact assessment, we have the formal islands impact assessment, which is important as well. Following the assessment in line with VTP for primary care delivery does allow for delivery in primary care on the islands, but it's not a tool which really is very amenable or has been at all successful with approval for delivery of vaccination on the mainland, even in very isolated parts of the mainland. So that's still something that we will need to work and negotiate with our colleagues in Scottish Government on to see where we can get common ground, and looking at the equalities impact assessments is a vital part of that. So I entirely agree.
Anne, and then Jerry.
So I think first thing I'd like to say is to just echo Sarah's remarks about recognising what a challenging task this is, and to thank all of the staff that have been involved in developing the solutions that we've developed so far and in achieving such good vaccination rates as we have done, despite what Tim, or recognising what Tim was saying about the slightly slower situation with this programme. However, I suppose, well, and it was also good to hear Pam assure us that the national programme is working with us to try to improve the systems that we're working with to make them more suitable for our area. I am still concerned, though, because we have had persistent difficulties, and the scale, I suppose what I'm also concerned about is that I feel at the moment there are many unknowns. We're not sure what the staffing situation is yet, whether we can staff all the clinics that we'll need. We're not clear, as far as I can see, about what the financial risk might be. So I find it quite difficult at this stage to take moderate assurance about the situation, because it's one of the things that Tim's paper does make very clear is that we still have a lot of work to do to get to the end of this transformation programme. So I suppose two things. I'd like to just just be assured that in terms of looking at whether this programme is a good fit for our areas, we are looking quite broadly from a best value perspective, rather than from what appears to me to be a fairly narrow set of criteria that has been set in terms of the options appraisal that allows us to move out with the programme. And that we are gathering evidence from that broader best value perspective to continue those discussions at a national level, where we think that our population does, or our situation, whatever that be, our finances or our staffing situation, means that we do need some more flexibility. So that's my first ask. And secondly, I think there's quite a way to go in the planning here, perhaps more so for North Highland and Argyll and Bute. And I just wondered how the milestones that we need to meet to get to where we want to be in 2023 are going to be monitored through the governance system, Are we going to get regular reports to the board about this, or is that going to be a responsibility of the IJB and the Health and Social Care Committee? Thanks.
Thanks, Anne. I see Pam wants to come in. Tim, do you want to respond immediately and then bring Pam in?
Well, can I just respond to the second to Anne's second question? I think that Pam may particularly want to deal with the first. In terms of the reports back, the reporting system that we have is the Vaccination Programme Board, which reports in to the Performance Recovery Board, and performance systems are being looked at again. But we have that reporting in through our performance system, so that will come up to the that will come up to the board. So we will have regular reports coming into the board. We also have regular meetings with Scottish Government at the moment there in terms of the COVID developments there every fortnight that we have performance meetings with Scottish Government. So we have a performance system which is appropriately monitoring and feeding back.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I absolutely am looking for the best value overview of what this means for us in terms of the options available to us to delivery. Now, the kind of prescribed option of the vaccination transformation programme, which emerged through the GP contract, is one way to do it, and actually that's the way we're supposed to or required to do so at the moment. However, the world has changed quite significantly since all of that was negotiated and agreed. We know our inequalities gap post-pandemic, as we move through this pandemic, the inequalities has widened. We know that with the current issues around fuel and poverty, that has become really, really magnified, and therefore in terms of us achieving our Fairer Duty Scotland, all these sort of things, we would be in real danger of there's a potential to ignore all those things because you have to deliver on what's been prescribed, and I don't think that's what we're about. So for me, it is absolutely about best value, and I can understand how communities don't understand this. They've had a very locally led, people they know, confident service that they've felt good about, and they don't understand, I guess, the rationale behind the change, which of course was about demand on general practice and freeing up our GPs to be able to do the more complex things, because vaccination is complex to deliver in our area, but it's not a complex procedure. So the intent when this was put in place was for good reason. However, in terms of logistics and delivery and best value, our financial arena is also changed and continues to be a massive challenge. I think as a board, we would want to understand what that could and should look like, and then decide whether there is a discussion to be had around our particular circumstances. The options appraisal does not, as Tim has set out, that process does not support us beyond a few islands, and that just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense in a remote and rural context. And I guess in a time when you would want to optimise your delivery model to deliver good outcomes and maximise the resources you've got, I'm not sure that this puts us in a strong starting point. Notwithstanding, we want to protect our GPs to be able to do GP work. So I think that best value lens, as opposed to fitting in a box lens, is what we're exploring now. And I think it's going to be really important for the board, as well as the execs, to totally understand what that could look like, and then be clear and confident in what approach we want to take going forward. Until we've got real clarity on that, I think we've had to tee it up the way we have. And the finances as they stand, If we find that the model we're pursuing is the right model, then we need to make the case for why we would need more money to run that. And there is an option to do that. It's been NRAC'd, and the evidence has to be supplied then if that NRAC is not sufficient to cover the costs. And in remote and rural, we know already it's not sufficient to cover the costs, and in remote and rural context, we should be able to make that case. But I'm very keen that we understand it through the lens that you've described, Dan, and I think that's really important for us.
Thank you, Pam. Jerry.
Thank you, Boyd. I really don't have anything to add, because I was going to raise exactly the same issues as Anne had picked up, but I think Pam has very eloquently described, I think, the process that we need to go through. I think, like Anne, I'm probably struggling to take moderate assurance, but that's not because I don't believe that the team know what needs doing. I think it's the scale of the challenge and not going down the rabbit hole of this is the prescribed solution. I think we have to recognise the challenges to a remote and rural setting, and I'm really heartened to hear what Pam is talking about there, and I was very struck here by the logistical challenges that could sit behind this, or do sit behind this. We've spoken this morning about letters, but we've got the vaccine supply chain, we've got the cold storage, etc., etc., etc. So I'm much more heartened by what Pam has just said to me. But I think we as a board do need to think about what would be the governance route to actually not so much make the final decision, but actually to understand what is actually our delivery plan going to look like, and what will be the impact on almost on a community by community basis. And I think that's something we do just need to ponder about, so that if we're going to make a series of decisions, so that, or a decision so that delivery mechanisms are different in different communities, we as a board are cited on that, and we are able to provide the logic as to why that's the decision that the board has made. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Boyd. Yeah, building on what Pam was saying, I think there's a couple of risks here that we need to think about and perhaps even put in the risk register. The first is that, yes, we have a programme, yes, we're looking through the vaccine transformation programme as a whole, and the government says, yeah, we recognise it, we're going to give you the money, blah, 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 you carry on. The risk to me is, if we can demonstrate that the GPs are required, that by the time we get there, the GPs may turn around and say, no, I'm sorry, we're not going to do this. And then we're stuck between both rocks. The hard place is already gone. I mean, it's the rocks that are hitting us now. And we need to recognise that and think about how we're going to be able to move flexibly enough within the programme, within the constraints within the programme, and within the political aspects that are bound to come up through this, to get to a point where we can deliver for the community, whichever community that is. Thanks.
Thanks, Alex. Susan.
Thank you, Chair. Just one last brief point. I mean, I really support what others have said here, and particularly I was also uncertain about the moderate level of assurance here, given what we know about how much there is to be done. And it just reminded me that one of the things we had talked about was having a very short statement where we would say what it would take to raise something from a moderate level. And I think if in this instance we had spelled out all of the things that it would take, we might say, well, are we really at moderate level? So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim, do you want to respond to these points?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're all points well made. I think in terms of Jerry's point regarding what happens at a local level, that is the point of having the system where we set out what's needed and then move to that local level. Now, it may well be that the local level is a lot more local than that put within the appendices on the paper, but there is flexibility in our model to do that. And I think what the challenge that we've got is implement that best value approach in the context of discussions with Scottish Government, and be able to get an agreed approach. And I certainly also agree with the comments around the GPs. I mean, we also need to recognise there is a different that different GPs do have different views. Some of the GPs don't want, and some GPs in more isolated areas already do not want to continue with the vaccination. So there will be areas throughout the board where we will need to have local provision. There are GPs in more urban areas who are desperately keen to continue with vaccination, and who don't agree with with what's in the GP contract. So it's a complicated picture, but we certainly don't want to alienate people who who we would be able to give the most appropriate and the best value service. In terms of assurance, I would say, I mean, I certainly agree that there is a long way to go. I think the moderate assurance is there both because of the framework that we have for delivery, the commission that is designed to get there, the progress that has been made, but also the demonstration of what we have been able to do, and the assurance that the COVID programme over the past almost year and a half now has been able to deliver. But I would certainly agree there is a long way to go to give a better level of assurance.
Pam?
Yeah, I think, we, as we knew coming in here today, need to pursue the actions that have already been requested, and to understand that we're not, I guess, barking up the wrong tree, that we're definitely, our assumptions play through. So even if, we know that there are GPs, as Tim said, that maybe don't wish to continue, and equally there are those who would. And I guess it's about really understanding the ability to mitigate the risks that we're seeing doing it in the pure form, and whether there is merit in a mixed model that ultimately delivers best outcomes for people, so timely access to vaccination, and within the financial framework that we have in order to deliver that, and with the staffing model secured that doesn't unhinge everything else, because that's the difficulty. If we've got staffing challenges right across the board, so we want to be using our staff in our workforce, and I don't just mean our employed workforce, I mean our contractors, I mean third sector partners. How do we really optimise the workforce we've got to get the outcome for people, and not find ourselves so constrained that we continue to really struggle with this, or we're robbing Peter to pay Paul. So I think these are very real issues for us as a board that we've got the right to explore and discuss and consider. And if indeed we feel that there's a worthy debate to be had here, that we take that forward appropriately. So I'm not looking for revolution here. I'm looking for outcomes for our population that make sense, that make best use of the resources we've got, and that our time is spent delivering a good programme, and not constrained or arguing about how it could have been done differently had we been able to negotiate a different position. So I think there's some bits for me that I've asked for that are missing in order for the board to feel happy in the approach that we're taking, or even to begin to challenge the status quo. We have areas that you would need to be cited on. So there are pieces of work done. We'll try and get that drawn together. And I think the quality impact assessment is an absolute must in this day and age. The world has changed significantly in the last 2 years, and we know how difficult it is for people. What we don't want to do is make this one really important public health intervention difficult. So I think we have a duty to work through this appropriately, and then we may find ourselves back at the same place, but we might not. And I think that's the bit we need to just conclude. And the teams have worked really hard on this. And it's easy for me to stand and decide that that's what we can do. It's not so easy for others to make that decision. But I think the best value approach is what we need to set out.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Pam. In light of the discussion so far, what I'm hearing is that we cannot take moderate assurance from the paper as it is at present, and that there are governance issues arising here. And what I would propose is that we take limited assurance from the paper as it is at present, while recognising all the good work that has been done and is being done to address the situation, and that we ask Tim to give us another report at the July meeting of the board, when we would hopefully be able to see a more secure position on some of the issues that have arisen today. And in the light of the announcement of funding, future funding from the Scottish Government today, that the situation might become even more difficult to achieve. So if you're happy with the proposal, I would suggest taking limited assurance from the report today, thanking the team for all the work they have done and continue to do, and ask Tim to come back to us in July with another paper updating on the situation. In the meantime, you will go through the Performance Management Board and through the FRP as well, in terms of reporting. So are you happy with that approach? Can I see if you're happy with that approach? Okay, thank you. Well, that was a longer discussion than anticipated. And I think we need to take a break of 11:31 now. Can we resume at 11:45? Please.